Okay, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we actually have a little bit more of a structured kind of how-to type of video for you guys. With the success, of course, of Seiko launching pretty much the most affordable mechanical GMT movement that's out there. More and more folks are going to be using these types of complications, whether it be through this Seiko 5 GMT or another watch that will be powered by this similar movement offered by Seiko Instruments and a third-party micro brand. So with that, I just figured it would be a good idea to put out a video out there because I'm hearing more and more that folks are just a little bit confused about how these work. And I did do kind of a ramble differences between true GMT, true travelers, or a caller office style GMT. But this is going to be more structured and more of kind of how to informational for you guys. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. All right, guys, now to start, here's a little chart or a map of the different time zones. You're seeing the word UTC. Just so you know, UTC is Universal Coordinated Time, and it's just pretty much the same thing as GMT. UTC is also known as Zulu time because it's 0 hour. It's where all of other time is measured off of in terms of an offset. So that's a 0, and then anything on this side of the map is going to be plus, and anything on this side of the map is going to be minus. So it's something to keep in mind as well. But if you're wondering the difference between GMT, which is Greenwich Mean Time, and UTC, Greenwich Mean Time is this time zone that UTC falls under. UTC is just a newer name for it, or Zulu time, again, just a newer name for it. The reason why we probably started off with 0 being there is because before atomic clocks and satellite time and everything like that, the most accurate timekeeper was Big Ben. So that is where they started measuring time off of. You know, the most accurate clock would be 0, and then any other time zone after that would be later. So that could just be an urban legend, but I mean, to me it makes sense, so I'm not going to argue with it because yes, we've been caring about time for a long time, and Big Ben has been around for a long time as well. The reason why I have this watch here is because we'll be kind of using it as, you know, typically when I set a watch, I will go to time.gov and set it off of atomic time, but that would be really uninteresting, so figure I can just show you guys this watch, which if you haven't seen the full review, this is the G-Shock Virtual Armor. It's fully titanium sapphire glass, has pretty much the best module in there in terms of having Bluetooth capabilities and, you know, multi-band 6 and every pretty much bell and whistle you can think of for the digital readout G-Shocks. Yes, there are analog G-Shocks out there that are going to have an extra bell and whistle or two, but this one, of course, also still in the classic square setup. For me, ultimately legible and usable, and it will be really useful for this video. Now, on the other side, of course, we have this great Seiko 5 GMT Blueberry, as some folks call it, or some will say Batman or whatever, because it has black and blue, but it has a blue dial. So for me, Batman isn't totally accurate because Rolexes that are called Batman bezeled typically will have a black dial. So I think the Blueberry moniker suits it, especially because the dial itself has some hints of kind of purplish tones that go to it. But some things to look at when you're checking out a GMT watch in terms of like the key characteristics and design language that we normally cover. Now, this is going to be more the functional side, right? So when you see a watch like this, typically they're going to say this can track up to 3 time zones simultaneously. Can you calculate more than 3? Yes, but in terms of doing it all at the same time, this would be 3 time zones. And if you have a GMT watch that doesn't have that chapter ring that has the 24-hour reference on it, or it's not on the dial, then technically you cannot track more than 2 at the same time, because even if you switch and you change the time zone on the bezel technically you're still not referencing that, because most people aren't going to know that without having that reference there that says that's 1600. Most people aren't going to be able to do that. The difference, on why it's easier for the three hand is everybody understands 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, right? Those are the cardinal points. It's a lot easier for you to estimate on a 12-hour scale versus a 24-hour scale. Case in point, why most folks don't know military time. I was in the Marine Corps for a number of years, almost 10 years. And military time is just on a 24-hour scale. If you didn't know that, typically instead of PM, it's just going to go through, right? So instead of 12 noon switching over to 1 PM after that, it would just be going to 1300 all the way up to 2400 or 0, right? Which would be midnight. So those are all going to be kind of useful terminologies while we're going through this. And when you set the watch, right, this isn't a video about how to just set a basic watch, but in terms of utilizing a GMT watch, whether it be a collar style or a traveler style, it's going to be relatively similar. I would say the traveler and / true style GMT will be a little bit more intuitive for travel, because you're going to be reading your local time off of those main hands, right? And essentially, let's be honest here, when you read a watch, you're trained to look at those hands, right? This hand here is just kind of an extra bonus hand for additional reference. No one's looking at this 24-hour hand for the time unless you kind of train yourself to do that. So the best thing to do is be able to jump the time on your main hands with this and then use this as a kind of reference. Right now, the way everything is set, you can see 1600, right? 1605. 1605, about to be 1606. If you guys really want to get into the time hack of it all, that's always fun. You can see that's very pleasurable. Bam, right? So, right, 1606, you can see 4 p.m. essentially, and there's the 4 o'clock. There's a 16. I have it currently set to where they mirror each other. It's kind of a day-night indicator, AM, PM. So I know that it's not 4 AM because it's 1600 versus it being 04, right? So there's that piece of it. So that's typically how I'll leave this in its kind of resting functionality. But I do like to, know in terms of the next easy way is I'm in the West Coast. I can set it to East Coast time. If you're in the East Coast, you can set it to West Coast time, and basically you'll have your offset, and it'll be 3 hours, I think, because there's daylight savings right now, or typically it's normally going to be a 4-hour difference. Now, once you set that offset in here, then now you'll know in the morning that, okay, they're 3 hours ahead of me. So at 8 a.m., it's already going to be there 9, 10, 11 a.m., right? So you know that you're going to be later when you're talking to them versus earlier, and you also know they're going to end their day earlier. So if you need, a job done or something like that, and you're talking to a coworker, you're going to want to know that offset, right? So that works kind of both ways, and that's another very common way in terms of it being a collar GMT. What makes it unique when you have one of these rotating bezels is now you're actually able to calculate different time zones based off of this map here, which is going to be, which I'm sure you've seen, hey, different time zones are plus or minus off of GMT or UTC or Zulu time, right? Those are all the same. Again, UTC, Zulu time, and GMT. It just means this is where 0 hour is, and then when you calculate, will be off of that, right? So for me, being a lover of Japanese watches, maybe I want to know what time it is in Japan. So the first thing I'm going to do, right, instead of me going online, let's say, if I could do that, or I can go on my phone and ask for the time, I would do that. But if you have this watch, now you have that capability. But the first thing you need to do is be able to set this GMT hand, set it correctly to UTC time, right, or GMT. So what I'm going to do here is I would access, any source that I have, right, world time, UTC, and it's 2300, right, which is about 11 p.m. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull out the crown, and I'm going to go to, make sure I'm not, basically you'll have one direction would be quick set, date, and the other direction is going to be the hand. So, ooh, that's wanting to quick set the date. So go back, and it was 2200. Yep, or 23. So one more. 2300, right? So now we're at 23. So that is going to be UTC time. Now, if I want to know what time it is in Japan, I'm going to go look for Japan. And guess what? That's plus 9 hours. So Japan is plus 9. And I'm going to essentially shift over this bezel 9 positions. And you got to remember that's 2, 4, 6. So every one of these little plots in between is another position. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So now that I have that shifted over 9 positions, I will know that the time, if I look at it, it's 8 a.m., right? Because this is a.m. versus later on would be p.m., right? So this is now 8 a.m. and in Japan while I'm filming this, right? So 8 a.m. in Japan. So very cool, right? These are slide bezels because they're not meant to stay locked. Like if you were going to travel, you wouldn't want to lock in your bezel like this. I know people say, oh, well, you can just do this. It's easier than a true traveler's GMT, because then you don't even have to unplug the crown. Well, guess what? If you're doing this, that's not an intuitive way to read time. Right? Like who's gonna read time this way? You're automatically, your eyes are gonna go to these hands, because that's just the way that you read analog time readouts, right? So again, this is more of a useful piece in terms of calculations. And again, it's not the only way to do it, but I just try to keep it simple. If you haven't created some type of habit, there's nothing habitual about the way that you read this watch, and you're just trying to learn the easiest way, right? So now that you have this set and that you know that the time in Japan is going to be 9 a.m., what you can do now is you can take that hand and you can click it over to 9. Then you can reset, and boom. Okay, so now you know it's 9 a.m. in Japan. And because it's ahead, you know it's the day ahead, because I'm in California and I'm back here and I'm behind. I'm already minus 8 from GMT time. They're ahead 9, right? So you add that together, that's how many hours they are ahead of your local time. So I know right now, today is going to be Saturday for them. It's already Saturday the 31st in the morning, versus I'm recording this on Friday afternoon in my time, right? Because you can see the local hour time is still going to be 4 p.m. So that's pretty much the gist of it if you really want to be able to use it. And you have, of course, it's really easy to get access to this, or a little pocket guide. You'll find plenty of places, even maps will tell you in terms of the different times. So if you're traveling, that's one really easy way you can always do that. So if you set your hand to GMT time, then it makes it easier to calculate, right? It's just, if you set your GMT time to your local time, uses an AM PM indicator, it just makes calculations that much harder. It honestly, I don't see why anybody would do that. Really what you want to do is, set it to the GMT or UTC time zone, or, again, it's all the same. It's that same Greenwich Mean Time time zone right there, right? Big Ben resides somewhere in that little area. So if you just measure off of that, you'd be good to go, right? So that's just something. I know it's a little complex and it can be a little bit daunting for a GMT watch, but that's typically what you're going to do. And again, this is just for the collar style or office style. And again, having this rotate, it's for calculations of a secondary time zone. It's not for your main. The last thing you want to do is to say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go travel and then I'm going to set my time that way, and then I'm just going to have to try to carnally remember that that's, you know, the time, like that's just too much. If anything, you're going to want to calculate it with the bezel and then just move the hand so that you can read it that way if you're going to do it that way. Or you could rehack the whole movement essentially, and then you can set the local time to the local time, and then you could set the GMT time to your home time if you wanted. Again, not quite as intuitive as having an independent hour jumping travel style GMT, which is you're going to find, you know, on a Rolex or an Omega or a Grand Seiko. But it still works. It's not like this is not a GMT watch. You have a GMT hand, you can do that. And again, remember, if a brand is advertising up to 3 time zones, they need to have a fixed 24-hour scale around the dial, either on a chapter ring or on the dial itself, because otherwise, again, that's really just 2 time zones, because you're going to go 12-hour scale and then 24-hour scale. That's 2 simultaneously. To have it with the 24-hour scale fixed, then you can do up to 3, because then you can calculate. It's really up to however many. You can still calculate time at any location, really. It's just not going to be simultaneously, because you're going to be going from one time zone to another time zone, so you're not really reading them all at the same time. So hopefully that wasn't too brutal. I just figured now that these are going to be a lot more accessible, it is good. So I'm going to go ahead and click off the world time here and go back to my local time, and you can see 16:15, which is 4:15 p.m. and it's Friday, right, at 9:30. In terms of the date there, you can see the seconds is still hacking away. And that's one of the nice things about being able to set this, is you don't have to interrupt your seconds hand by resetting the time. So that is really the main thing. Otherwise, you could just take a regular watch and reset the time anywhere you go. So that's why, for me, I would rather not reset the time. I would rather hack the 24-hour hand correctly and then just use it that way, versus trying to, you know, somehow offset this and leave everything as it is, because then if you do that, it's just not the same, right? You're just because you turn this way doesn't mean you're instinctively going to look at the time and say, oh, it's almost 1600. You're gonna look at this and it's gonna, well, I mean, obviously I shifted it in a way that is close to the other time, right? But let's say if we did like that, hey, it's close to 1800. Not necessarily, right? You're not gonna really remember that. So, but you guys remember that I did switch this actually to the Japanese time zone. So that's a nice thing. And then what I would do once I'm done trying to contact, call, or whatever, or let's say I fly to Japan and I'm just using it that way, it'd be much easier to just set my watch to Japanese time when I get there, whatever you want to do, and then just use this 24-hour scale again as a reference secondary. Your main, in your mind, it's going to be read those hands. Secondary is going to be the that special red hand, and then tertiary is going to be once you get to the rest of the 24-hour scale and turning this bezel. And then you guys understand that watches are very directional, right? 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, those are cardinal points. So once you start messing with those reference points, especially when you add it onto a 24-hour scale and not a 12-hour scale, it's going to be really easy to get mixed up. So yeah, I'm not going to travel and then just leave everything as is and then just shift this over. That's silly. It's meant to be easy to turn because you're going to be using it to do calculations, not to figure out, you know, a fixed position and just leave it there. So what I'll do is, just for fun, I will, if I turn this the right direction, nope, there we go. So I'm going to go back to 1600. It's going to be a little bit past 1600 because you can see it's a little bit past 4 p.m. And then that's it, guys. That's how you do it. This video was so much longer than I wanted it to be. But you know me, I tend to ramble because this is off the cuff, baby. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. Hopefully this was helpful for you and I explained it in a completely layman term, you know, from your honest, average, everyday bro. From that perspective, you know, I tried not to get too fancy with it, but this is very useful to have, and it's really great that Seiko made it super affordable. And yeah, this is a great watch. And if it wasn't for the fact that I, you know, kind of picked up my dream Grand Seiko GMT, I would probably wear this watch a lot more often. But I love what it represents. I actually bought it from Belmont Watches, so check them out if you're looking for one of these, because they keep stock, and sometimes you can even get it for underneath normal MSRP, which is great. So check them out. Again, thank you guys for watching. If you like the video, please hit like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.